Hello, I'm very pleased to be joined this morning from Athens by Gilad Atzmon. Gilad is possibly well known to a good portion of our audience. He's a jazz saxophonist of renown and also a thinker and philosopher, an intellectual in the old school, in that Gilad asks questions and he refines these questions and continues to think where others maybe shy away from the answers that are coming forward. Gilad is perhaps one of the last remaining exponents of what you might term Enlightenment thinking. I'm delighted to welcome him this morning to talk about matters relating to COVID-19 and specifically the land of his birth, Israel. So Gilad, welcome.
I'm delighted to be with you, and I'm thrilled to hear that you think so greatly about me.
I've been following your writing. It's remarkable how often, when we get onto a subject that really interests the writers in the column, and we're looking around for who else is talking about these issues, it's so very often you. You're one of the voices out there that is raising the issues. And one of the issues you raise in this case is the fact that the state of Israel, the country of Israel, has volunteered or been led, you'll maybe explain which it is, to become a guinea pig for the vaccination program and a guinea pig nation for the whole COVID program of control, of lockdown, of limitation of freedom in order to fight disease. So perhaps you could start with just outlining what the policy in Israel has been and how it's differed from the UK and Europe.
Yeah, I think that you hit the nail here. The case of Israel is very interesting. We see vast vaccination. They are basically number one by far in this mass vaccination contest. But we have to remember that what we see in Israel is an elementary part of Netanyahu's election campaign. We'll have an election exactly in a month's time. And Netanyahu must win this election if he wants to stay out of jail. He is facing some serious legal battle. And being prime minister will equip him with the right power to fight the case. Now, it is very crucial to understand that Netanyahu realized that at a very early stage, a year ago, that the COVID crisis, the COVID pandemic is key for his success. As some of your viewers remember, it was Netanyahu who pushed for the basically first lockdown in the West. He spoke about millions, if I remember correctly, of potential victims in Israel, and so on and so on and so on. The vaccination campaign, the mass vaccination campaign, started in Israel on the 20th of December. And it was a very efficient process. They managed to push a lot of Israelis into vaccination, and now they are just about 50% of the Israelis have been vaccinated. However, despite the fact that in the world, a lot of mainstream news outlet see it as a great success, 50% of the Israelis are not so sure that it's a great success. In fact, despite of the huge pressure that is mounted on Israelis by the government, 50% of the Israelis are reluctant. And by saying that they are reluctant, they are actually risking being excluded from a lot of activities. They have now this green passport in Israel that you can only get if you are vaccinated twice. And if you don't possess such a green passport or green pass, you won't be able to visit gyms and concerts and so on and so on and so on and so on. You won't be able to fly abroad.
So I was reading the Israeli press on this, and they came up with a very stark statement. They said that all of the mathematical models said that because of the huge uptake in vaccination and the rapid speed of the vaccination program in Israel, that by the middle of January, the COVID rates would be plummeting. That's what all the models said, and all the models were wrong.
Of course, and I'm just getting now to the devastating numbers, and these are numbers from Israeli mainstream news, from Ynet, Haaretz, the Israeli biggest papers and news outlets. This week, these are the numbers. 75% of those diagnosed in Israel are under 39. Only 5% were over 60. This is a real shift in the nature of the pandemic as we remember it. It was something that really attacked very old people and vulnerable. The number of critical patients dropped in Israel to around 800 now. And this is definitely the lowest number since the beginning of January. However, it is more than double the number before they started the vaccination. All right? So the situation didn't improve.
This mirrors what we've seen in the UK, because we've had
absolutely.
We've had
absolutely, and it's not just in the UK.
Yeah.
And as you will see, I prepared some graphs for you, and we will look at them. This is something that we see in all the countries, in every country that went for vast mass vaccination. In Israel, 60% of critical patients are under 60 years old.
Now that's new.
Sorry. Critical patients are, I was mistaken. 60% are over 60 years old, which means that 40% are under 60.
Under 60, yeah, and
this is a lot.
And this is entirely new, because the uptick in problems that's coincided with the rollout of the vaccine. We've seen that in the UK. In Scotland, they rolled out the vaccine first of all with the very elderly in care homes and such like, and the death rate due to COVID recorded basically doubled after the vaccination program was rolled out. To the sound of complete silence from mainstream media and certainly from government and health authorities. No one was talking about it, but the figures doubled. We've seen a whistleblowers come to the UK column across England and Wales, an 81% increase in deaths due to COVID after the vaccination program was rolled out, and multiple reports from people who were running care homes that the care homes had no fatalities or sometimes no COVID until the vaccine program. And then once the vaccine was administered, within a week or so, they had major problems all through the institution. And we're seeing a possible explanation for that is the lowering of the human immune system caused by the vaccine, so that it makes people very vulnerable for a week or 2 weeks after receiving it. That's maybe one explanation. You might want to discuss others. So we're certainly seeing what you're describing in the West, but this move towards younger people being affected, this seems to be entirely new. And of course,
I think I want to concentrate on it because I think, you know, the one thing that I'm not going to do is to offer a scientific or a biological explanations. I may touch it, obviously, but you know, I'm not a doctor, and I'm not going to advise people what to do. But what I do instead is analyzing the information that is available for all of us through the mainstream news. I also like to mention that things that we see in the mainstream news aren't necessarily truthful as we would like to believe, because as I mentioned, there is a lot of politics involved, and we will touch it. When we will discuss why is it that 50% of the Israelis do not buy into the vaccine situation despite the pressure. One of the reasons is that they don't trust their mainstream news. They don't trust the prime minister, who is now subject to some serious legal issues due to being suspected of some heavy corruption and so on and so on. But let me just, because it is quite unique what is happening in Israel, let me just brief you about the numbers of young morbidity. So we hear about, this is mainstream news, about pregnant women. Many are in hospital. As of yesterday, 10 were in critical condition, and we only learn about it because one pregnant woman died in Israel. This is not mainstream news. I didn't find anything about it in mainstream news, but through the Israeli social media, and this is very, very important. I cannot verify it at the moment that this is indeed the case, but we hear reports about women bleeding. And we also hear reports that babies refuse to be breastfed by mothers who are vaccinated. Now, this is not a medical information. I must emphasize that this is information that is discussed in Israeli social media, despite the fact that social media try to stop this kind of discussions, like on Facebook and Twitter.
So the women bleeding, is that women who've been vaccinated? Is that the report?
Yeah. Of course. Sorry, I should have mentioned. What I said about breastfed babies and women bleeding is all referring to vaccinated young female.
Do you know whether there's any indication about the pregnant women who are critical and the one who's died, whether they were vaccinated or whether they were COVID cases without vaccine?
They don't share the information. Yesterday, again, doing some detective work, there were some people who argued that the woman that died was vaccinated once, but not twice. But I cannot say that I know the information because, as I mentioned, there is a lot of politics involved. And in fact, they are using the case of those women who are in severe critical situation, critical health condition, to actually push more and more women to get vaccinated, despite the fact that Pfizer just announced 2-3 days ago that they are willing to check whether it is safe to vaccinate pregnant women. So in Israel, they're already pushing for vaccination of pregnant women, despite the fact that the company itself that produced the vaccine is not so sure at all whether this is safe or not. And this is exactly the issue that concerns so many Israelis. They feel that they are guinea pigs in a ludicrous and a very, very dangerous experiment. Now, there are some very important numbers that you and your audience should be aware of. Morbidity in newborn COVID cases saw an extreme rise in Israel. We are talking about 1,300%. So we had something like 400 cases in late November. It is now 5,800, if I remember correctly.
This is the after a year, more or less, after 9 months, 10 months of the COVID pandemic. Mm-hmm. What you're describing is almost a different disease.
It is all the symptoms suggest that we went through a very unique shift, and this unique shift now in the Israeli press, they said, oh, this is the situation all over the world. Now, I'm not the WHO, I'm not the World Health Organization, and I'm not running here a research unit, so I can only make my investigation reading through a lot of press about it, and I didn't find any evidence that this is what we see anywhere else in the world. I looked, for instance, in England, and in England we are talking about a baby boom, and we are talking about child obesity. Nobody refers to rise of 1,300% in a rise in a newborn COVID morbidity.
And I'm pretty sure they would, because the tendency is for the state at all stages to hype up, to accentuate the risk, the danger, so that it's promoting compliance with the lockdown, promoting compliance with vaccine. So it's not as if the state would tend to keep that sort of information secret. I'm pretty sure. Of course.
I don't have any doubt. Now, in Palestine and Gaza particularly, Gaza is the most highly populated place in the world, and they don't have vaccines, or not until recently. They just in Gaza they just received 2,000 doses of the Russian vaccine, the Sputnik. Literally, physically, practically, you cannot even engage in social distancing in Gaza, and the numbers are very, very low.
See, this is another thing that I wanted to specifically ask you about, because not only is Israel massively ahead of any other country in the world with their vaccine program, and they have been leading the lockdown on the third lockdown. We might talk about that in a moment as well. But Israel's a very unusual society in that it's much more divided than any Western country, and there are communities within it which are to a greater or lesser extent isolated and are behaving differently. So it offers this contrast. You've got the Arab population within Israel. You've got the Arab population in places like Gaza and the West Bank, and you've got the ultra orthodox, the Haredim, who have taken a different view as well. And in these different parts of the population, what sort of differences are we seeing in their acceptance of government policy and the results? Is there any kind of correlation you're seeing there?
Okay, this is a really important. I was just about to touch this subject, and thank you for raising it. So, before the mass vaccinations through October, November, we saw that there were two segments within the Israeli society that were, the Israeli called them kind of red zones, where the COVID-19 was in very dangerous level, distributed throughout the society. These were the Orthodox Jews, who basically defy at large the social distancing. They believed in herd immunity and so on and so on. And we saw very similar numbers in the Israeli Arab segment. For those who don't understand, they are basically Palestinians who live within the Israeli territories, and they are basically Israeli citizens. Once the vaccination campaign started, we saw a very, very interesting shift. While the Orthodox Jews went en masse to get the jab into their arm, the Palestinians, for different reasons, didn't follow this pattern. In the early stages, in January, we saw a rise, listen carefully, of 15 times morbidity cases in the Orthodox Jewish segments. And we saw immediately a significant drop in the Israeli Arab, in the Palestinian Israelis segment. Not taking the vaccines, their level of morbidity dropped sharply. And it was then when I started to gather, and I was one of the first to publish articles about it, that there is a clear correlation between vaccination morbidity, or more specifically, vaccination and the so-called British mutant. We found out that, for instance, Bnei Brak, which is a totally Orthodox Jewish little city near Tel Aviv, was totally infested with British mutant. Now, people are not flying in the world. How did the British mutant made such a successful aliyah to Israel? Aliyah means immigration. When Jews immigrate to Israel, they call it aliyah, ascending in their view. How is it? How is it? The only thing that travels around the world is the vaccines. And it is quite strange to see this correlation. Now, you mentioned another number that is really, really crucial. You refer to Scotland, and I can inform you that we see exactly the same numbers in Israel. In Israel, as of today, 5,600 people died from, we don't want to say from COVID. We identify 5,600 as a COVID-related deaths, whatever that means. 2,600 of them, which is something like 85%, died just in the last 2 months since Israel started the vaccination. So almost half of the numbers just died
and this,
when
you're quite
Israel
right.
started to distribute the remedies.
You're quite right. This is exactly what we've seen in Scotland, right? A huge increase, and in other places as well. Gibraltar being one of the most stark, where they had a handful of cases, and then the vaccine was rolled out, and the cases went to multiples of what they had in the previous 9 months. So this does seem to be a pattern, and the unintentional experiment that you described there, where one community within Israel, so it's in the same country, so the same more or less social distancing rules, the same legislative rules, the same, at least approximately the same level of healthcare, approximately the same level of nutrition. You have one group, the Orthodox Jews, having en masse compliance with vaccination, a 15 times increase in
it is unbelievable. And let me tell you something else, that for instance, Rahat, which is a Bedouin, actually Palestinian city in the Negev, they have zero COVID and they don't take the vaccine. So one of the two green communities in Israel ended up Palestinians. All right. Now, I tried to compare the case of Israel with other countries that are engaged in mass vaccination. And I prepared a few graphs. I don't know if you can see them or if you'll be able to use them. So I took the case of Israel, United Kingdom, United States, and the UAE, the United Arab Emirates. And I noticed that 3 days after these countries started their mass vaccination campaign, they saw a huge and continuous exponential rise in cases that was followed by a similar rise in deaths. So I decided to compare between, for instance, the case of UK to our neighbors, the case of Belgium. And in Belgium, we had a lot of cases, as we know, and a lot of deaths. It's actually, I think, still number 1 in death per capita. Belgium, Netherlands, France. At the time, Britain death rate was rising exponentially under the auspice of the mass vaccination. In those countries, we saw the opposite, a complete drop. And this is what I show in graph number 2. What I did then, and this is really, really crucial, and I hope that you can use my graphs, but if not, I will try to explain it. We can find on the net, and we have to assume that it's reliable, though I'm not so sure about it, because people can really fiddle with the number of cases, as they do in Israel. They just do less tests. If you have less tests, you have less cases, and these are the numbers that are fed into the world statistics. Yeah, of course. It is more difficult to fiddle with number of deaths, but you can just change the criterions of death. All right. So we have to be very suspicious of all the numbers and all the graphs.
Yeah, which is what the CDC did in America. They changed the criteria, and
exactly,
and the change criteria meant that they increased the number of deaths by about 17-fold over what it would have been under the old criteria.
Exactly. What I did actually is very, very simple. it's really, really simple. And all the information is available to every person on this planet. It's on the net. We have graphs up to date of cases of death, but also graphs of vaccination. Now, when we look at Israel, Britain, UAE, United States, we see that there is a sharp rise, and then the numbers start to drop. So I looked at the point where the numbers start to drop and tried to figure out, looking at the vaccination graph, what segment of the population was vaccinated. So in Israel, for instance, where they did kind of a very rapid mass vaccination, it was 30%. By the time 30% of the population was vaccinated, at least with one jab, the number started to drop. In UAE, it was pretty much the same, 31. Now, Britain started the vaccination 2 weeks earlier, and because the NHS is not as sufficient as the Israel is, and Boris Johnson didn't need the vaccination campaign for his as an electoral asset. So Britain was way slower than Israel. In fact, by now, I think that, 20% of Brits were vaccinated? I saw 17 million. I don't know what it amounts to, maybe 20 or 22%. But in Britain, all the graphs are with you if you want to show them. In Britain, the numbers started to drop when we hit the 15%. But then I looked at Portugal. Why I looked at Portugal? Because there were a lot of there was a panic in Portugal because they saw rise in mutants and so on and so on. Portugal was very slow with the vaccination, and it was just 3% to change the direction, not even to flatten, to drop. And why? They had very few vaccines. They used it for people who maybe, I'm not sure about it, benefit from it. I'm not so sure because we don't know, because it is an experiment. We don't know how long the vaccine, the antibodies are going to last, how effective they are going to be, and so on and so on. There are too many questions, medical questions, that I don't want to enter at this stage. I also am not qualified to do so. But when you do it very slowly, you actually you induce the creation of mutant. This is clear because we see the correlation. But the crisis is actually far less significant. Now, let's try to understand why we see a complete different symptoms in Israel, to the point that you said we're actually dealing with a different disease. If diseases are defined by the symptoms, we are dealing with a different disease. I think that it is possible, and here I enter a bit kind of a biological discourse. I talk about evolutionary theory or whatever. It is very possible that when you face vast vaccination from the viral perspectives, from the virus perspectives, we actually induce mutants, and the reason that people are becoming cases are getting younger and younger in Israel is because we vaccinate younger and younger people. In Israel now, every person 16 and over is eligible for vaccination.
The point you make here actually is one that's been made also very recently by Dr. Andrew Wakefield, the extremely brave and determined voice in favour of more caution when it comes to vaccination policy and more humility and more examination of the real effects. He was making this point that the rollout of the vaccination can provide or cause a response in the virus whereby it changes in order to survive, and so the rollout of the vaccination promotes the emergence of new variants. So by rushing out the vaccination and not allowing natural immunity to take care of the virus you've got, the effect of that policy is to create something else, and the originators of the policy don't know what it might be, it becomes, again, we're back to this guinea pig, this experimentation. The point that Dr. Wakefield was making is it's likely to generate a change in the virus, a mutation in the virus, and that could be better, it could be worse, it could be much worse, and the effects are not really being anticipated, can't be anticipated, they're not being weighed up, there's not appropriate caution. And what's happening is a giant experiment, and then we're just seeing what happens when we run policies that we've never run before.
Now, I'm much happier with you quoting a medical expert on the topic, because obviously I understand exactly what is happening here, but I would prefer myself to refrain from offering a medical or scientific explanations. I'm a saxophonist, as you mentioned, and a philosopher, not a medical doctor. However, I must mention that in Israel there is one body who is actually slightly more reliable than both the press and the government, or the propagandist approach. And this is the IDF intelligence unit. And why they are slightly more reliable? Because they are committed to Israel national interests rather than a political victory in the next election. And they warned already in January that we are more than likely to see the birth of a unique Israeli mutant, and the reason is because, as you just mentioned, where the virus is under an existential threat, struggling, it will mutate and it will prey on different segments, and this is exactly what we have seen. Now, the reason that I find it important to mention these issues, and the reason that I write about it, and I can see that my writing about the Israeli case are circulating very far and widely, is because I think that we should prevent or at least make sure that people understand what they are engaged with, that government understand. One of the things that we see is that the government that were clumsy or slow or dysfunctional in taking a solid approach on the vaccines are actually doing far better than Israel and Britain and so on and so on and so on.
I mean, this is a vital point. You talk about, you say, well, I'm not a medical man, and indeed neither am I. I'm an engineer, you're a saxophonist, and we're talking about these things, but we are human beings. And of course, there's so much that's not well understood including by the medical profession. You actually quoted a doctor. You write here, earlier this week I watched an Israeli news interview with the head of the COVID ward in Tel Aviv's biggest hospital. When asked about the spread of foreign mutants and the lack of improvement in cases and deaths despite large numbers being vaccinated, he was quick to answer, "Why do you ask me? I'm just a doctor."
Yeah. Now, this is from my paper, yeah.
This is I was quoting your paper, yeah. So
yeah, well, just about to mention it, because when Israeli doctors were asked about it, Israeli medical professions, they used every possible trick, like politicians, to avoid the topic. Now there is a big question that we have to ask ourselves, and this is not just Israel. Why is it that our entire medical profession seems to be so treacherous to the values and the ethos that we used to associate with this profession, with the medical profession, with doctors? One of the reasons that we see it is because in the old days, when we were young, and we are getting old now, the medical profession was concerned with distributing health. Nowadays, all it does really is administrate medicines. This is what they do. And when I'm sure that it happened to you, that you went to a doctor, your NHS doctor. It happened to me many times, and they kind of identified what they thought I had, and then they looked at the computer to see what is available for me, which is very strange. When we were young, when we were kids, we went to a doctor, he identified what we had, and he didn't have to look at the computer. And I tried to ask what is going on, why it happens like that, because the medicines that are available to the NHS, and it's probably all over the world, are all administrated now by governments. Some people say that this shift has something to do with the fact that so many doctors are funded or financed or are kind of payroll from pharma giants. And I'll tell you something else that I started to think about in the last few days. And I have kids, and I think that you also have kids, and when our kids kind of going through the A level, we find out that if they have really good results, they may have a chance to enter medical school. Now, the people who go to medical schools are those very kids that manage to score very high results in school. So the problem is way deeper, because it's something about our education system, and it's not just in Britain, it's in the West in general, doesn't encourage proper scientific methodical thinking, to the point that we don't even understand the fact that in scientific realm, what we want to see is a vivid debate, criticism, disagreement. People now think that science is all about consensus. This is complete nonsense. The history of science and the progress science was defined by revolutions. Newton was a revolutionary guy. Yeah. Einstein was. Galileo. And this is the issue. Actually, in science, revolutions are presented by people, I'm sorry to say it, like us, like by dissenters.
Yes, I mean, these are vital points that you're raising. We don't have a chance today to go into, but maybe very soon we will. the failure of science, the abandonment of truth in science, the corruption of science by big money, by big pharma, and the over specialization, which means that there's no holistic view, there's no coherency about it. People can operate in their tiny niches and not bother themselves that there's no broader coherence to the intellectual effort. All of these are issues that are pushing it very much in the wrong direction, and it's been a spectacular fall in the last 50, 75 years, that sort of time span, from maybe the mid-50s to now, and it doesn't show any sign of turning around. And you're quite right. It starts in the education, starts in the schools, and it also runs through professional education, because professional education, including doctors' education, is a very strange beast. All of this overwork, sleep deprivation, this is how you break people, and yet this is part of the training of a lot of medics. This is a very interesting topic about what they're actually doing. What happens to the mavericks? What happens to the people who are skeptical, who have a different view? They don't make it through the professional examination process and professional accreditation process. They're excluded. Perhaps that's what.
And basically, it is not something that should surprise us at all, because it is very possible that, and we're extending now into a new discussion. So I'm not so sure that we want to go there, but I'll just mention that when you look at the history of humanity or the history of the West, 99.99% of our past, we were oppressed. We see our elementary freedom being compromised, and so on and so on. And if this is the case, the authoritarian reality we are living in is actually homecoming. We were very lucky to live and enjoy certain liberal liberties, not because we were so brilliant. It was just used to titillate the Soviet bloc. That's all. And some people were clever enough to understand that once the Soviet bloc collapsed, there won't be any reason to keep us free and free thinking and enjoy any of our liberties we are so familiar with for much longer. And this is really, really what we are seeing now. There are a lot of questions that remain open, and the biggest question is why the Israelis decided to make themselves into guinea pigs, and why the Brits, for instance, are following clumsily behind. Let me tell you something that is very important about the success of the vaccine. A lot of studies from Israel, and in the last 2-3 days, we started to see similar studies from Britain that suggest that the vaccine is 95.7 in defeating the disease, in reducing critical illness, and so on and so on. I believe that these studies may be genuine. What I mean by that, it is very possible that if you take the vaccine, you are immune for a while. For how long? I cannot tell you. No one can tell you. And this is something that I never doubted. We have a lot of cases of people who took the vaccines and fell ill, and some of them died. But the numbers, let's assume that the studies are genuine. This is not the issue. When we are living in a society, we have to take care of the whole of society. So we have to take into consideration the possibility that there is a correlation between vaccination and mutants, or esoteric mutants like the British mutants, that have a dramatic and tragic effect on the rest of society. To make this very short, I believe that it is possible that people who take the vaccines are more immune for a while, but I think that no one can deny the fact, the possibility, let's say, don't want to, don't make it, the possibility that they actually induce mutants and actually spread the virus. And this is the only way I can understand the shift that we see in Israel, the morbidity that we saw in Israel, the R number that we saw in Israel, and definitely the death rate that grew twice.
And this is the point, that our wise overlords, our governments, our medical authorities have decided, for whatever reason, political reasons in some cases, monetary reasons in some cases, genuine belief in some cases, to engage in this particular policy. And it's having effects. And it's necessary to understand the effects, and it's necessary to understand in a rational way that there is such a thing as cause and effect. And you talked earlier about the problems in science and in education. And if we're to sum up what those problems are, it's the failure to any longer hold that there's a chain of cause and effect which is capable of being understood, as opposed to just facts that just are, and there's nothing more to learn about them. We have to understand the cause and effect. Israel has been a unique example of this and raises unique questions. And Britain's following in its path, and so is the US and other countries, UAE. And unless we try and make sense of the cause and effect that we're seeing, unless we try and make sense of the changes in death rate, the changes in the age profile of those who are being diagnosed, unless we try to make sense of the difficulty of diagnosing this disease, of the definition, of the problems with false positives, of the correlation between testing rate and positive rate, all of the difference between this so-called vaccine or claimed vaccine and every other vaccine there's ever been, because it's new technology. Unless we try and address all of these issues in the open with rationality, then we won't learn from any mistakes that are currently being made. That requires the ability to discuss, it requires the ability to ask questions, and it requires the ability to get answers. And I don't think Israeli society or British is exactly supportive of the people who ask questions these days. People like Andrew Wakefield are being closed down, their careers are being terminated. The pressures are being applied all across social media, all across the political world, all across the medical establishment, all across the medical profession, and everywhere else, that stops that inquiry, that questioning, and that searching for a rational understanding of cause and effect to take place. This makes
I must sorry for kind of interjecting, because it is really, really important, and there is something crucial to to mention in that regard, and it brings us back to the quote from Aretz that you read just a few minutes ago. To start with, 50% of the Israelis refuse to be vaccinated. The government mounts huge pressure, and they are somehow reluctant, facing some serious consequences. They won't be able to go back to work, and so on and so on and so on. But there is another thing that must be mentioned. When you read the Israeli press, when you listen to the Israeli politicians, and by the way, in Israel, and you see the same thing in Britain, the entire political arena supports these experiments, which is very, very unusual. You know, there is not one politician dissenting, having the guts to stand up and say, listen, guys, you know, let's be slightly more careful here. Not one. Maybe in Britain there is one, but I cannot think of any. When you listen to the Israeli press and the Israeli politicians, they are actually describing a war. They tell the Israeli people, we are in a war. We are in a war with an unseen enemy. This is the bottom line, and this is why they manage to get so many people to buy into this experiment. And by the way, and this is an issue that was raised earlier on by Israeli dissenting doctor. They said, listen, it's fine to make experiment. We have to make experiment, but we have to make sure that every person who goes through the experiments are fully aware of the possible consequences and sign on a letter that agrees to participate in such adventure. Okay. Now I want to take from this point of a war that is so typical to Israelis to think in terms of a war, because they are always in a conflict with the Palestinians, with Iran, with all of the Arab world, with the anti-Semites all over the world. They're always in conflict. And I actually believe that peace and harmony could be a very useful solution to this vile approach. What do I mean by that? Love your neighbor. And if you don't want to love your neighbor, just try to live in harmony with all those viruses, because if you knew something about science, you would know that big chunk of your DNA was created by viruses. We have millions, if not billions, of viruses that are operating inside our organism and sustain our existence, living. And I believe that most of us can live or could live with whatever COVID was, and I'm not even sure that we are dealing with a viral issue, but I just looked at the numbers. Now, at the moment, when I look at Israel, my two kids had COVID, and they kind of had the symptoms and were positive. Suddenly, since we started vaccination, it is all around you. It is all around you, and you see it. You see more people dying, and so on and so on. And I'm not so sure that we any longer can deal with it in an harmonic way, because we don't even know what it is. I'm afraid, and I cannot verify it because I'm not a scientist, that this interference with our holistic understanding of being and our bodies may have introduced something that we cannot yet understand, and it may even take a very long while before we understand. We are dealing with some unpredictable issues. And this is the issue. I believe that the answer to this belligerent war thinking is actually to search for harmony, not just with your neighboring country or your next door, but also with the soil, with the sky, and with the virus, and with every virus. This is the way to live.
Gilad, thank you very much for joining me today. It's been a pleasure talking to you. Until next time, where we might pick up some of the issues about science and education that I agree with you are central to the problems we're seeing, and interrupt any meaningful move towards solving them. I think that the aggressive response of the state towards those who ask questions, particularly those in the medical profession who sound the alarm, is a sign of great weakness on their part, that they do not have the answers, and they are terrified that they will lose public confidence because they can see it ebbing away, hence all of the constant drumbeat of aggression towards the so-called anti-vaxxers. This is a sign of weakness, a sign that they cannot engage in conversation and debate, and they cannot look honestly at the questions, and that makes it all the more important that we do so. So, Gilad, for doing that today, thank you very much.
Pleasure, mate. Always great to talk to you as well. Bye-bye.